Okay, shalom, gentlemen. And ladies, of course. We never should forget the ladies. Today's topic is, why is Hametz such a serious crime, so to speak, during Pesach? And why is the name of Moshe Rabbeinu really not incorporated in the Haggadah? Which is, I have to tell you something. This became such a fascinating topic for me around 1998. So more than around 16, 17 years ago, I was in Israel. And I went to a lecture in Jerusalem. And the Haggadah Shel Pesach, which is the most well-known Jewish book after the Torah, did you know? The only place that the name of Moses comes is in the Kiddush, which is not really talking about the story of Exodus. But the Magid, we don't ever mention Moshe. And if you watched the last shiur, if you were here, thank God, a lot of you were here, we said that the whole idea of Passover is gratitude. Is this fair that the greatest prophet of all time, we delete and forget and forsake his name? We don't include his name in the entire Magid, which Magid is the longest part of the Seder. And we totally do not mention Moshe Rabbeinu, not even once. So that's the first question. Second question is, we know we Jews are forbidden to own Hametz. Now, what is the definition of Hametz? Any of the 5 grains. Either spelt, of course, wheat, oats, rye, and barley, if they ferment, right, and become inflated, which is usually happens within half an hour if they come in contact to water. So any grain that comes in contact to water for half an hour, becomes what? Hametz. On Pesach, already from now, and my heart, if Pesach is about gratitude, we really, from the bottom of our heart, I wanted to thank all our mothers, mother-in-laws, sisters, all those brave women that make such a beautiful and wonderful what? Passover for all of us, and make it possible for us men to explain the Haggadah. And we truly, from the bottom of our heart, we thank you for making the house kosher for Pesach, for preparing all the delicious food. But the question is, the whole year we eat chametz. Bread is chametz. Why is it so terrible that the Torah almost a dozen times tells us you can't own chametz? Chametz shouldn't be seen. What is chametz? You can't even use, right? The halacha teaches us a plate, right, Yigal, that we use during the year for chametz. Are we allowed to use that plate for Passover? No. What is the more Kabbalistic, deeper philosophical meaning on an ethical level? Of course, on a religious level, for thousands of years, especially our Persian Jews, we're the children of Mordechai and Esther, and we've kept the tradition and law to the last iota. But on a deeper spiritual level, what does chametz symbolize? And why does the Torah a dozen times have to tell us, don't own it, don't even see it? That's why, we have to sell our chametz. The best thing to do from now is throw chametz parties. Consume your chametz. So by the time that you get to next Friday, not this Friday, next Friday, in 2 weeks, which is going to be the holy night of Shabbat and Passover. Parenthetically, I just want to tell you, halacha, that this year is not necessary, the Ben Ish Chai, to say Shalom Aleichem or Eshet Chayil, because it falls on Friday night. But what's the symbolism and deeper meaning of why chametz is so terrible and we have to get rid of it? Not even use any plates that had come into chametz. If we want to use those plates, we have to do Haggadah. So, just to be very direct and stern, the Zohar already talks about this, and the greatest Kabbalist, and already the Midrash, that it's no coincidence that the name of Moses is not incorporated into the Haggadah, which is the most popular Jewish book after the Torah itself. Think about it. More Jews own more copies of Haggadahs than Sidurs, right? Probably, I would say in today's day and age, there's more Jews that have in their houses more copies of Haggadah than even, right? Torah or Tehillim, possibly. And the name of Moses is not in this book. It's not in the Haggadah. Why is that? And the second question, why is Hametz such a terrible thing that we can't own it and have no contact with it and we have to even burn it, a little bit of it? See, I have a great mentor, Harav Eliezer ben David, and he says, each one of the Jewish holidays gives us a special energy and vitality. Matzah that we eat on Passover, very simply, is what? Matzah is the vitamin of what? Emunah. Which means what? What is the worst characteristic that takes us away from God? Self-worship. Hametz is the symbol of self-worship. Hametz and matzah really have the same ingredients, but hametz is what? Inflated. So that, unfortunately, comes to teach us that what? We have to know that the most terrible thing that causes us to have blockage from God and not be able to really become one with God is if we think ourselves, God forbid, is God. And I want to tell you such a fascinating idea from the Rambam. The Rambam says we find two things about Moshe Rabbeinu. What are they? Shalom Chaim. What are the two things that we see Moshe is the best at in the Torah? He's the most humble, right? In the Bamidbar it says Moshe is the most Vaish Moshe Anav me'od me'kol adam asher b'nama. Moses has the all-star, all-time trophy of what? Humility. And there's another thing we see in the Torah. That Moshe Rabbeinu is the most what? Biggest prophet of all time. One of the fundamental beliefs of our faith that really we should confess and say it every day after tefillah. If you look on the last pages of Shachrit, Hare ani me'ami be'emunah shalema she Moshe Rabbeinu Adon HaNevi'im ve'lo kam be'Yisrael keMoshe od. There is no prophet, not even Messiah, Mashiach ben David, will have that intimate relationship of seeing God face to face. Like it says, we say in Farsi, Musa kalimullah. Like I'm talking to you, Kivyachol, Moses can talk to God. All the other prophets, they were in a trance, in like a state of total passiveness, like sleep, and they would see a vision. But Moses was totally cognizant, talking to God, face to face, direct, ba'aspaklar ma'ira. So the Rambam in his such a beautiful introduction to Pirkei Avot says, make no mistake. This is not a coincidence that Moses is the greatest prophet of all time, and Moses is the greatest, most humblest, and truly modest person of all time. And this, you see, the Rambam is talking in the language of Kabbalah. The Rambam says such a beautiful idea. He says every one of our deficiencies, bad characteristic like laziness, which is going to be another class, Hametz also symbolizes that. If we don't have self-control, right? We're after lust. Any one of our bad midot is a blockage. Imagine God as the light, as the sun, kivyachol. We're just making a mashallah, of course. God is everywhere and God is even... But if we want to compare God to light, it's very, very difficult to see God if you're blind or if you have very, very thick glasses that are full of mud. So all our bad habits and our spiritual deficiencies like laziness and being after honor and lust, these causes blockages. It makes us not be able to attach to God. And the worst one that makes us the most inferior that God truly despises is somebody that worships himself. He thinks, you know, unfortunately, some people in life, only three things matter to them. You know what it is? Me, myself, and I. And some people, they are so obnoxious and so self-centered that it's like a mud over the glasses. They can't experience the light of Shekhinah. So the Rambam says, listen, Moshe Rabbeinu for 40 years, what was he doing? He was a shepherd. He wasn't just playing billiards or cards or, you know, eating hummus in the desert. You know what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing? He was doing self-perfection, Yigal. And in those 40 years, Moses became so humble, he broke down all his barriers. So it's no coincidence. When you don't have any barriers to God, because you're the most humble, then you can talk to God what? Face to face. So, the answer to our first question, you just put this over there.
Rabbi,
The answer to our first question, and then I'll take questions, is why is the name of Moshe not located at all in the Haggadah? Basically, just by, you know, one name, his name, but we don't say in the part of Magid, Moses took us out, or Moshe did this, or it's like we deleted his name. You know why? The Hametz Chaim says such a beautiful idea. The Hametz Chaim says like this. He says, imagine if Fox News, which is the only good source of news, by the way, if Fox News would go to Moshe and would say, Moshe, we have a question for you. Do you want your name in the Haggadah or not? Moshe, which is the most humble man of all time, would say, who am I? Va'anachnu ma, like the Gemara in Chulin says. Moshe Rabbeinu ultimately, when the Jews complained to him, both Moshe and Aaron said, what? Who are we that you're complaining to us? Moses says that I'm just a figment of God's imagination. The only thing that really exists is what? God. Therefore, Moses' desire was that his name should not be in the Haggadah. Because a person that's truly humble shuns, he runs away from honor and people putting him high up on a pedestal, right? The opposite of a lot of what we see, the paparazzi and Hollywood and people, they want to be famous. And most of the times, instead of becoming famous, they become infamous. So we know it says in Ashrei Yigal, Retzon Yera'av Ya'aseh Ve'et Shavatam Yishram V'Yashem. Parenthetically, one of the most important parts of prayer, because unfortunately, we have become so, it's hard for us to have a lot of attention span. But if you can, we know Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, if you say it 3 times, you're guaranteed to go to heaven. The Gemara in Brachot says, if you say it b'kavanah. That's why, Poteach et yadecha umaspeh lacha retzon. So in Ashrei, it says a very, very fundamental pasuk. Retzon yera'av ya'aseh ve'et shav'atam yishmam yoshem. God does the will of his righteous. So if Moshe Rabbeinu, the Haggadah, by the way, was written like 1,000 years after Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. But the people that wrote the Haggadah, they knew that Moses, in his heart of hearts, says that I'm humble. All the credit goes to who? God. So, since Moshe Rabbeinu does not want his name, and God loves the righteous so much, God made history make it that the authors of the Haggadah did not write his name. Because that's the vitamin, like I said. Passover is the time, we don't feel it so much. We're spoiled in Los Angeles. But just go to any other part of the world is dead. Passover is the time that the world rejuvenates and becomes alive again. And when we accomplish, Baruch Hashem, Jews are very, very, we have the best doctors, lawyers, but when it's great to work hard, play hard, and become very great. But there's a tremendous danger. You know why? that you say, where is credit due? Credit is due to me. And you forget God. Hametz is that. Hametz is when you inflate your ego. That's why we have to burn Hametz. That's why we can't eat Hametz. Matzah is the vitamin of humility. The vitamin of what? Modesty. And I just want to read for you because I think a lot of people, they make a very bad mistake. And this is such a terrible thing. In today's Western culture, do you think anybody is like, oh, he's such a is it a virtue really today in today's society? In Persia, where we come from, in Middle Eastern, it is more like part of the culture. But in America, unfortunately, you know what I'm saying, Shlomo Chaim? It's not like a virtue to be humble. But in Judaism, and I think because people have the wrong definition of humility, like Rav Shach used to say, he says people think that being humble is a sign of weakness. So I wanted tonight, Thursday nights, we usually try to do some Mesilat Yesharim from the Rav Chaim Lutzato to the contrary. Please know that amongst the greatest trophies and titles a person could have, Moses is the greatest person of all time. Do you know in the United Nations, they did a survey and they said, who is the most influential person in the world? And Moses came out on top. And the other 4 people were Jewish also, by the way. Jesus and Sigmund Freud and Einstein. So if you ever doubted that we were the chosen nation, go take a look at that survey. But Moses, please, if you are humble, doesn't mean that you shouldn't have self-esteem and know who you are. Humility is not a sign of weakness. Humility is a sign of greatness. Of course, if you're the most knowledgeable Torah scholar, look at the introduction of Rav Moshe to his, the greatest halakhic authority for America was who? Rav Moshe Feinstein. And I'll tell you a fascinating story about him, how he was truly a humble person. Humility does not mean to be self-delusional. To say if you're the smartest person in the room and you know the law, you're a genius, let some imbecile that doesn't know halacha, let him become the leader. No. You understand? To know thyself is to know God. We have to know where we're holding. God forbid we shouldn't inflate our ego. But we have to know how precious we are. But do you know what the ultimate meaning of humility is? Humility is, if you're the richest person in the world, or the biggest rabbi in the world, or the biggest genius in the world, like Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato says, humility is not so much an action. Because if you fake humility, it's also a sign of that you're being egotistic because you want to put another trophy on your thing. He's not only is he genius and is he rich, he also is humble. If you're looking for a trophy for people to recognize your humility, that's not true humility, That's not authentic humility. You know what real humility is? To recognize how great you are. But who gets the credit for that greatness? See, the Rosh Yeshiva Zatzal Rav Weinberg also used to say, in today's business, how do people become very, very successful? They go to Ivy League school. A lot of people, that's the ladder to success, right? They go to Harvard, they go to Yale. So this causes a big misconception. You know what it causes? People come say, oh, you know why I have $1 million house or a $10 million house, or I'm the best lawyer, I'm the best surgeon? Because look how much of a hard worker and a high IQ I have, that I have my degree. So his degree on his wall, that he has a law degree from Harvard, becomes his idol. It becomes his chametz. Matzah is the vitamin of humility. Matzah teaches us that, yes, nobody can deny that you're the best lawyer, right? Nobody can deny that Moses is a great leader. He's the Messiah of the Jews to bring them out of Egypt. Humility is not to say, oh, I'm not a great person. I am great. Moses knew that he was a great prophet, but where does the credit go? To me or to God? So, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato says so eloquently here. He says, can you imagine the lion is the king of the jungle? But think about it rationally and logically. Should the lion be full of haughtiness? No, and say, oh, it's his nature. It's a God-given gift. Like we read in the Haftorah on Tisha B'Av, in Mincha, in the morning of Tisha B'Av. Jeremiah, one of the greatest and most eloquent prophets of all time, says, Al yitalel chacham bechokhmato, begibor begiburato, ve'ashir be'oshro. If you're the wealthiest, don't be proud and give credit to yourself. Or if you're the most highest Einstein of your generation, or you're the Schwarzenegger, like we had the governor out here in California, say, oh, I could lift 1,000 pounds. Everybody else is insignificant. Kim bizot italel hamitalel. The only thing you can be proud of to know that if you're the most wisest, smartest, noble, wealthy, it's all coming from what? God. Just like if an eagle or a falcon is the most fastest, swiftest and most fastest bird, we all know. He doesn't deserve credit. It's his, God gave it. So if you have great potential and you bring your potential to fruition, of course you should acknowledge that and in a certain way be proud of it. We're not saying to be to have a low self-esteem, but the difference between greatness, the difference essentially between Hametz and Matzah, is where does the credit go to? Shlomo, Yosef Shlomo, did you have a question?
Yeah, is Moshe, is the prophet that's going to come, the upcoming prophet, is he going to be as the same as Moshe?
Yeah, so I want to explain something. The Rambam says very clearly, hopefully we got redeemed in this month, and hopefully Mashiach ben David, the Messiah, will come and redeem us very soon. If you want to know who the Mashiach is, his personality and style of leadership, he's like a protege of Moshe. But when push comes to shove, who's greater? The Torah is the truth. And the Torah says, Lo kam be'Yisrael ke Moshe od. Nobody has, and nobody ever will be, as great of a prophet as Moshe. We have two Shlomos here. There were Shlomo HaMelech, in his own area of expertise, in the area of what? In the area of wisdom, we can say was wiser than Moshe. But in prophecy, that relationship, to be able to talk to God face to face, it's the one and only who? Moshe. So I wanted to also talk to you. We talked about what Maimonides understands. Also one of the other great Rishonim, one of the greatest Sephardic rabbis of the last few hundred years, when he wants to talk about humility, he has a letter, and I recommend everybody try to read this letter at least on Fridays or Shabbats. It's called the Igeret HaRamban. And you know what? Nachmanides, he moved to Israel, and he had a son, Nachman, because his name is Moshe ben Nachman. He named his son after his father. And he said, listen, son, read my letter. And the letter is, I want to tell something. I want to share with you guys. I was not religious all my life. After I read this letter and studied it a few times, I saw this is what the Torah is about. The Torah is so practical that it helps you overcome anger. I saw that the Torah is not some just abstract, ancient, archaic, God forbid, law. So I don't want to say it's my only favorite book, but one of my most precious and favorite books of all time is the English version by Rabbi Fuhr of the Igeret HaRamban, which I use so much. Unfortunately, it has the cover is missing and it ripped. But the Ramban writes about humility that it's Shehi Midah Tova Mikol Hamidot Tovot. The greatest of all good attributes. Of course, there's many good attributes. To be a giver, not a taker. To be swift, not to be lazy. But what's the ultimate greatest of all attributes is what? Humility. Because God, I'm sure Moshe had a whole bag full of good character traits. You understand? Why did God pick humility? Well, guess what? It must be that humility is the greatest of all the what? Attributes. And in his book, he quotes from one of the most prestigious Baalei Musar. What are some practical ways to know that we're becoming humble? Guys, we were learning the Mesilat Yesharim. On the ladder of the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato, do you know, Shlomo Chaim? Anava is toward the end. So to think that overnight you could just become humble, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Ari, writes, for 40 years when he was meditating in the desert, he had to break all his barriers to become humble. So humility is a very, very lofty and high madrega. But what are the hallmarks of a humble person that we could recognize that we're developing humility in ourselves? And this is such a beautiful idea. Somebody that speaks gently. Somebody that's always getting angry at people and demanding at people and raising his voice on people and commanding people. That's a sign, God forbid, that he could be very egotistic and self-centered because you had the audacity, the chutzpah not to listen to me? Think about it. Guys, I want to tell you something. Can you grow any fruit or grain or really any food without water? The great Kabbalists say that humility is like the water of all spirituality. You understand? Almost all good attributes flow out of what? Humility. When we give credit to where credit is due. And not to me, myself, and I, but to who? The Almighty. We have to really... So, somebody that is humble in his actions, he talks very respectful and in a soft-spoken voice to people. The second hallmark of humility, H&H, right? Hallmark of humility, the holy book, Shevet HaMusar, says accepting praise. You know that some people, some people, we have a tendency of flattering each other. Oh, Mr. So-and-so is the greatest and this and that. A truly humble person, if he doesn't deserve the praise, he says, no. With all due respect, my friend, I'm not as great as you say. I'm not like that. The third hallmark of a humble person is, you know what? Genuine humility increases in proportion to the humble person's success, like I said. If you're the greatest lawyer or greatest judge, you realize, wow, I owe God more. You have to become more humble. Not like 99% or 90% of people. They say, oh, it's because I went to Harvard and I'm such a wise and hard worker. No. A truly humble person, the more successful or wealthy, which is very hard to find in today's. But guys, I want to tell you a terrible thing. We read in prayers that if you make yourself into an idol and you disrespect other people, mashpil geim ade aretz. Unfortunately, we've seen this a lot of times. People like Haman, right? The Gra says Haman is the poster child for this. Somebody that wants to self-worship and make everybody else worship him, God takes him and throws him to the ground. And that's the ultimate danger in not being humble. The fourth hallmark of the humble person is, if he gets into an argument, the humble person does everything in his power to swiftly make peace. If you see two people, and I want to say something because, Shlomo, we have to do more videos and classes together. One of the worst things that breaks my heart in today's society is divorce. And you know who gets the worst short end of the stick in a divorce? It's the poor children. And my Rosh Hashiva, Rav Aaron Feldman, wrote a book. Go read it, The Kettle, the River, and the Bird. He says that from the Gra, that not every marriage that ends up in divorce, but a lot of them is because in today's society we live in such a narcissistic and self-centered. Opposite. We live in a society of Hametz. We live in a society of narcissism. Go look, the guy has a bad day, he goes and kills everybody in a mall, murders everybody in cold blood. We live in a... Gentlemen and ladies, the reason why we have to eat Hametz, eat matzah with a lot of meditation and spiritual inner feeling is when you're biting on that matzah, look how simple and flat the matzah is. In life, it's wrong to say it's either my way or the highway. That's a person that is full of chametz and ego. The hallmark of a humble person is that he's willing to sacrifice and peace. That's why, at the end of prayers we say, Oseh Shalom Bimruvav. We go back 3 steps, right? Because that's the hallmark of a truly humble person. Another thing is a humble person doesn't take revenge, and he's able to forgive even the people that attack him viciously, like unfortunately happens. And probably the most awesome benefit of being humble is, you know what? In life, sometimes God, for whatever reason, and it's all for perfectly good reasons, throws us some curveballs, right? Like I myself, I developed asthma and a terrible bronchitis this last month, and I had the flu, and I was always sick. But if you're humble, you can accept the suffering without breaking. You realize that even when God brings the darkest moments in our life, it's because He loves us. God is love. God is light. Even in the most darkest moments of our life, the humble person is full of what? Accepting and love. A humble person will never end his love with God, because he understands that, listen, who am I to say I'm perfect? Maybe I deserve it. See, if somebody is very self-centered and egotistic, when God throws him a curveball and things don't go his way, he explodes. I don't deserve this, God. Why are you doing this to me, God? And then he gets more. It's one of the great things about a humble person is he's saying, I realize there's God in the world. And sometimes life is so sweet, like we eat honey on Rosh Hashanah, and sometimes life is very, heaven forbid, sour. But the humble person is able to always, under all circumstances, accept the divine God. And I would be doing an injustice if I would not tell you what Rashi says about humility. Another very, very practical meaning of humility is what? Look at Rashi when he explains, Vahi ish Moshe anav me'od mikol ha'adam asher pnei ha'ama. Please, everybody, you have homework. Go look at Rashi in Bamidbar. I believe it's in the end of Parshat Bahalotcha, towards the end, Maftir, right, Igal? When God tells us the secret of Moses' success, the reason why he became the greatest prophet is because he was the most humble, right? Like, it's no coincidence that he has both of those.